So early mazel tov to you and your family. And it's good to have many of you here today. And we have a chance to study for just a little Torah for a few minutes as we prepare to end our service. If you don't mind taking back out your Eitz Chaim, your Chomashim, and turn to page 1101. And I want to share something with you that I think found very interesting. I think it's important to take a look at. And you'll see why in just a moment. But as you read through the Torah portion this morning and you heard from Rabbi Morgan, you know that this is the parsha dealing with the judicial system and the different rules for some of the primary officials, the future king, Kohanim, the priests, the prophets. But there's also rules for the soldiers, for the army, practical rules, especially as they go into battle. So let's go to page 1101. It's the chapter 20. And put yourself in the scene, whether you're a soldier back then, or for the modern state of Israel, or in America, or in your favorite action show like Game of Thrones, right? And imagine the religious figure coming forward in just a moment to say these words. So it says here, chapter 20, when you take the field against your enemies and see horses and chariots, forces larger than yours, have no fear of them. For the Lord your God, who brought you from the land of Egypt, is with you. And before you join battle, the priest shall come forward and address the troops. And this is what he's going to say to the troops. Hear, O Israel, you are about to join battle with your enemy. Let not your courage falter. Do not be in fear or in panic or in dread of them. For it is the Lord your God who marches with you to do battle for you against your enemy, to bring you victory. You should know that these exact same words have been used in modern day by rabbis in the IDF in Israel. They'll read these exact same words I just read to you. Don't worry, God's with you to bring you to victory. But now we're going to find something very unusual in the next 4 verses 5 through 9. There are exemptions. They're all ready to go, and yet certain people can leave. They can go back home. Who are those people? Let the officials address the troops as follows. 1, is there anyone who has built a new home but has not dedicated it? Let him go back to his home, lest he die in battle and another dedicate it. It's okay, you can go back home. Number 2, is there anyone who has planted a vineyard but has not harvested it? Let him go back to his home, lest he die in battle and another harvest it. 3, is there anyone who has paid the bride price, basically been engaged for a wife, but has not yet married her? Let him go back to his home, lest he die in battle and another marry her. All right, so far we have 3 exemptions. It may not surprise you too much. I mean, I guess someone could ask, didn't they know that before they left off for battle? Why are they doing it now? And the rabbis are going to answer, it's a reminder, right? Maybe Maybe they didn't want to admit it at the time. We'll see other reasons in just a moment. But verse 8 and verse 9 are the most shocking of all. The officials should go on addressing the troops and say, the 4th exemption, is there anyone afraid and disheartened? Let him go back to his home, lest the courage of his comrades flag like his. And when the officials have finished addressing the troops, army commanders shall assume command of the troops. So the 4th exemption is basically for someone who says, you know what, I'm afraid. I see those guys over there. They've got swords just like I do. They've got shields like I do. I don't want to die. And you can turn around and go home. Now, why would the Torah allow this? I mean, what if everyone turned around and said, you know what? Forget it. I don't want to fight. You can't blame them, right? So why is this even there? Well, the rabbis asked the same question. And we're going to go through just a few of these today. There are many, as you can imagine, many commentaries. That's the beauty of Torah, right? When you have an interesting question, when something seems out of place, something seems, why would they allow this? The rabbis have the same questions you may have and try to come up with answers. And the very first rabbi you should always study is the great Rashi. You may have heard that name before. He lived in the 11th century in France. And Rashi says, commenting on verse 5, it's number 1 on your source sheet. He says, has not inaugurated it, begun to live in the house. Such a man should return home because it would be heartbreaking if he were to die in battle and his new unlived in home should become the property of someone else. A practical reason. In source 2, same way. Ibn Ezra and the Ramban lived in 12th and 13th centuries. Practical reasons, right? Their minds would be on their houses, their vineyards, their brides, and they would lack the will to fight. Right? I can kind of understand that, right? You just got married or you're about to get married. You're thinking about the honeymoon, the wedding, your new bride. It's going to be hard to really get in there and fight. In number 3, very interesting, this is according to a more modern commentator. He actually says, and I'm picking it up in the halfway point of number 3, and he says it's not for these reasons. He says it's according to the very ancient and widespread beliefs, a bridegroom, and in fact anyone who has anything to inaugurate, was threatened to an unusual extent by demons. Hence, these men were eliminated originally in the interest of magical and ritual purity, and so for the protection of the levy, or the enlistment, and its effectiveness. And I could go in for hours about Jewish beliefs and demons and superstitions and ghosts and so forth, but that may have been the reason why the Torah said, you know what, we don't need any more bad luck. We don't need bad luck. We need to win this battle. But we won't go on to that tangent right now, but for practical purposes, right, that's the first category. Now the second category, and we're going to look at source number 4, maybe just for anxiety, right? Just kind of like the Torah said. Let him go back. If someone's afraid, tradition saw this as a command. He had to go back, for his anxiety would prove infectious. If you have a bunch of people shaking in their boots, that's not going to be good for the army. And, better those guys go back, because they're not really going to help us anyway. And go down to number 8, at the bottom right of your study sheet. The rabbi here reminds us the primary reason for turning these people back is that their own fear of dying will not affect the others. Therefore, he suggests, since some people did not feel afraid when they first left Israel, but then realized that when they approach the battle, they're given a second opportunity to return. All right? It's a little easy to be rah-rah when you don't see the enemy on the next hilltop. But when you see thousands of other troops, it's understandable at that point if you'd be afraid. Now, I think the next 2 explanations, 5 and 6 in particular, number 5 gives us, I think, the best insight into how Torah works. Often, we find the humanity in Torah. Let's go through it and see if you can figure out what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says. This comes from the Sifrei Deuteronomy, a midrash on Deuteronomy, written almost 2,000 years ago. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, "Come and see how considerate the Holy One," meaning God, "is of human dignity. When someone returns because he is fearful and faint-hearted, people who see him avoiding military service will merely say, perhaps he has just built a house. Perhaps he has recently planted a vineyard. Perhaps he has recently betrothed a wife." So see what's happening here? At the same time that the Kohen, the priest, is addressing the troops and giving them 3 exemptions for understandable reasons, he's adding the 4th at this point, so that everyone who turns around, they're not going to say, "Coward, coward." They may say, you know what, maybe that guy's not a coward. Maybe he's just going back to be with his fiancée or to finish that house. So it was almost like a compassionate streak in the Torah. That's why these exemptions are listed at the exact same time. The rabbis go on. Yet in all these cases, the people claiming exemption from military service have to bring witnesses to attest that this is really so. The exemption is the man who is fearful and faint-hearted. He is his own witness. When he hears the sound of crashing shields, he is frightened. The sound of neighing horses, he trembles. The sound of blasting trumpets, he panics. When he sees the unsheathing of swords, urine streams down between his knees, and he doesn't have to prove to others that he is faint-hearted. Sense of compassion, right? And number 6, very similar, but first, not as compassionate. There's a disagreement in the Talmud. Rabbi Akiva is sometimes a little stricter, a little harsh. I don't know if harsh is the right word, but just a little bit, direct, if you will, to the point. He actually is angry at these people. He says, the Torah meant literally that cowardly people should leave the field, because if someone lacked faith in God's help after hearing the Kohen assurance, he was not worthy of a miracle and did not belong in the army. Because remember, those first 4 verses that we read this morning said you really shouldn't be afraid. And if you're still afraid, just go home. We don't want you. But the next rabbi, Yosi HaGalil, is a little bit more compassionate. This declaration was directed at someone who was fearful and faint-hearted because he was a sinner and knew he was unworthy of God's help. In order to protect such a person's dignity, the Torah also freed those with new homes and so forth, so that when the sinner left the field, onlookers would assume that he was going because of his home, vineyard, or bride. So maybe he was a sinner, and that's why he was shaking in his boots, which could be understandable. And so let's go now to the last few sources, the bottom of your page, because this has practical applications today, whether it's in Israel or even here in the United States. Look at number 7. According to the Talmud, those who claimed an exemption had to submit proof, much like a conscientious objector under American law. In the modern American army, the draft was first directed to the unmarried, but being newly married provided no special exemption. And I love this story, number 9. We'll end with this. And these are based on true stories of chaplains, rabbis, in times of war, especially World War II. Victory is not the most important thing. The various exemptions that the Torah gives for military service teach us something striking. Even under a declaration of war, there are things that are more important than the war effort. The nation's moral fiber takes precedence over the war, and the building of families is the nucleus of the nation's morality. An important reminder, right? By allowing people to get married and establish homes before going to war, the Torah makes its priorities for us clear. Now, during World War II, some rabbinical students at the Jewish Theological Seminary were drafted for military service before their weddings. They and their fiancés skipped the large formal weddings that they had planned and had basic, simple weddings in the dean's office under a makeshift chuppah with all the proper blessings. After their wedding nights, they skipped off to the front. Some of them came back, but sadly, some of them never saw their new brides ever again. I think a reminder to us of the gratitude we have for all those who've served. I see Aaron here. I know you served, and Jay, Jay, of course, also served until very recently. And I'm not sure, Leon, you served. I'm sure you did. And others that are members of our congregation that have served. We have parents, grandparents, whoever it may be, and whether it's here in America or in Israel or other countries, we have a lot of debt of gratitude. And we see that the Torah, even back when, also understood the challenges of going into war. So with that, I wish everybody a good Shabbos.